The wind rolled across the dry plains like a long, tired sigh, bending the tall grass and carrying the smell of dust, cedar smoke, and something darker that lingered in the air. The sky stretched wide over the frontier, pale blue and endless, giving no shelter to the grief that weighed on her shoulders. She stood alone beside the wooden fence, arms wrapped around her swollen belly, feeling the child stir beneath her dress just as the wagon carrying her husband's body disappeared beyond the ridge. The horses moved slow, the wheels creaking like an old prayer, and she didn't lift a hand to wave goodbye. There were no tears left. There was just a hollow ache, like the land itself had opened up and swallowed the life she once knew. Her husband had been a rancher, a stubborn man who believed the land could be tamed with hard work and grit. He died trying to protect it, or so the neighbors said. Some whispered he died because he never knew how to stay out of trouble. Others believed he fell at the hands of wandering warriors who rode like shadows across the desert. The truth was heavy, buried somewhere between fear and memory. But one thing pulsed through her heart with a bitter rhythm. She blamed the enemy. She blamed them for taking her husband, her safety, her rest, and the future she thought she deserved. Grief turned inward and hardened into resentment, shaping every step she took. Life on the frontier did not pause for sorrow. The cattle still needed water. The gates still needed fixing. Food had to be stored before the winter winds swept down from the mountains. Yet she moved slower now, every task shadowed by the weight of her unborn child. She was alone in a way no widow should be, surrounded by wide land and long nights that seemed colder than before. Days passed in a quiet rhythm until one morning changed everything. It began with hoofbeats far out where the land blurred into heat and sand. She didn't notice at first. She was at the well, pulling the rope hand over hand, the bucket heavy with cool water. The rope scraped her palms, rough and familiar, but her thoughts drifted to things she tried not to remember. A man laughing beside her while the sun went down. Shared bread by the fireplace. Warm hands on her stomach, marveling at the small life growing inside. Those memories cut deep, and she forced them away just as the sound of riders grew louder. She looked up, heart tightening. A group approached, forming dark silhouettes against the sunlit hills. Horses slowed near the fence line, dust curling around legs and hooves. She stood still, gripping the bucket's handle, watching the riders with wary eyes. They wore feathers, leather, and hardened expressions that gave nothing away. Their presence stirred fear, anger, and something unfamiliar she couldn't name. One rider dismounted and stepped closer. He wasn't armed in a threatening way, yet he carried strength like a silent storm. His chest bore streaks of paint and tribal markings, and a leather strap hung across his shoulder. He gave a short command to the others in a language carried softly on the wind. They lowered their weapons and pulled something from one of the horses. She leaned forward slightly and her breath caught. It was a wounded man. He hung limp between two riders, barely breathing. His chest was covered in cuts and bruises, his skin marked with tribal jewelry and war paint that had dried to a faded smear. Blood crusted along his side where a blade had found its mark. They carried him like a dying animal, laying him in the dirt near her fence. She felt her pulse pound in her ears. Her stomach tightened. Her fingertips turned cold. This was no stranger. This was the kind of man she held responsible for her husband's death. A warrior from the same people. A reason her nights were filled with silence and fear. Her throat burned as rage crawled up inside her. Her thoughts screamed against the wind. Let him die. Let the sand swallow him. Let the land do what it always does. Her hatred begged loudly in her chest, louder than reason, louder than memory, louder than the child shifting in her belly. It felt like justice. It felt like fate. One of the riders gestured toward her, then toward the wounded man. He spoke slowly, as though choosing careful words that still sounded foreign. She understood enough to grasp the meaning. They wanted help. They wanted water. They wanted mercy. The bucket in her hand felt heavier than ever. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The baby inside her kicked sharply, as if reminding her that life continued whether she wanted it to or not. She knelt slowly in the dust, eyes fixed on the injured man. Beneath the paint and wounds, he looked young. His breathing was shallow and uneven, like each breath might be his last. The riders watched her with guarded hope, though none stepped closer. The world seemed to pause around them. Caught between vengeance and compassion, she could turn away. She could close the door, leave him under the sun, walk back to the house, and pretend she never saw anything. No one would blame her. No one would know. Maybe she might even sleep better, believing she had delivered some kind of balance to a world that had been cruel to her first. But something pulled at her heart, quiet and stubborn. Not forgiveness, not understanding. Something simpler, the memory of her husband, not as a man of anger, but as one who gave food to strangers and mended fences for neighbors who never returned the favor. She heard his voice like a breeze across dry grass, telling her that a heart hardened forever leaves no place for the child who will soon be born. She sighed, long and tired. The words slipped out before she realized she had spoken. "Fine. Bring him water." Her voice trembled, not from kindness, but from the weight of choosing a path she wished she didn't have to walk. The riders stepped back, as though surprised she agreed. One lowered his gaze respectfully. She dipped a cloth in the bucket and pressed it to the wounded man's lips, and he flinched, eyes barely opening. His gaze met hers for a heartbeat filled with pain and confusion. She looked away quickly, refusing to feel anything. This wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't peace. It was survival. Yet somewhere deep inside, she feared her choice might change her life more than his. As the sun dropped lower behind the hills and shadows stretched long across the fence line, she felt the first hint of dread. Saving him might not bring answers. It might bring trouble. It might bring truth she wasn't ready to face. The wind carried distant voices, horses shifting restlessly, the night waiting just beyond the horizon. She pressed the cloth to his wounds again. His breathing steadied slightly. The riders watched in silence, the sky darkening behind them. She swallowed hard, unable to shake the feeling that this man carried secrets tied to her husband's death. Secrets that could tear apart everything she thought she understood. And now, because of a moment of mercy she barely believed in, she was bringing those secrets into her home. The land was quiet as night approached, but her heart beat louder than ever, carrying a single thought she wished she could ignore. This was only the beginning. She carried the wounded man inside just as the light faded from the sky. The wind pushing dust across the yard like scattered memories. The house felt colder than usual. It wasn't built to shelter strangers, and certainly not men who rode with the same tribe she once feared in the dark. The wooden floor creaked under his weight as she lowered him onto a small cot near the fireplace. He groaned softly, breath shaking, as though each moment pulled him closer to the edge. She kept the door half open, ready to run if things turned bad. The riders outside waited silently. They kept their distance, but their eyes followed every motion, their presence sharp and unsettling. She wondered if they trusted her, or if they simply had no choice. Inside, the fire crackled weakly. She lit a lantern and set it on a crate near the cot. The light washed over his injuries, revealing how deep some of the cuts truly were. A wound along his ribs looked like it came from a blade. Another bruise along his forearm was wide and purple, maybe from a fall or a rifle, but he looked like someone who had been hunted. She fetched clean cloths and boiled water, her hands moving slower than they used to. Before grief, she had cared for animals, tended to ranch hands, patched up her husband after his careless fights. She knew how to clean wounds and stop bleeding. Her father taught her once that survival didn't care what side a person stood on. A body needed help the same way, no matter who it belonged to. Still, she hesitated. Every bruise, every bead of dried blood, reminded her of another man lying still beneath a wooden cross somewhere on the ridge. She touched the cloth to his skin and felt guilt rise in her throat. Not for helping him, but for wishing she didn't care. He stirred again, barely awake, whispering something in his language. She didn't understand a word, but his tone sounded like he was calling out to someone he knew, maybe a brother or a friend. She looked away, forcing her hands to steady. When she finished the first round of cleaning, she stepped outside. The riders remained near the well, quiet shadows under a sky full of faint stars. One approached her slowly. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was calm. He explained in broken words that the wounded man wasn't just a traveler. He was part of their group, someone trusted, someone they followed. There had been a raid near the river, not theirs. They had been ambushed by men wearing long coats and carrying rifles polished like city tools. Whoever attacked them didn't care which side they struck, only that they caused pain. She listened without interrupting. She knew men like that. Mercenaries, drifters, bounty hunters hungry for coin. The frontier was full of wolves, pretending to be heroes. The rider pointed toward the house, explaining that the man she tended held knowledge about who led the attack. If he died, that truth died with him. She didn't say anything. She wasn't ready to care about their troubles. Not when her own wounds were so fresh. She closed the door behind her and returned to the cot. The man breathed unevenly. He might wake by morning, or he might not. She sat beside the fire, rubbing her belly with one hand, listening to the quiet house shift around her. The night felt long, the kind that holds more questions than answers. Later, when the riders left to make camp a distance from the house, she drifted into uneasy sleep in a chair by the fire. She woke before dawn to the sound of movement. The man on the cot tried to sit up, but pain struck him hard, and he fell back with a hiss. She moved closer, stopping him before he tore open the wounds. His eyes opened fully this time. Dark, alert, full of heat and confusion. He scanned the room like a man used to danger. When his gaze landed on her, his expression shifted, guarded yet curious. He didn't speak right away. He just watched her, breathing slow, as if trying to understand why she was there. She put a hand on the edge of the cot and whispered that he needed to rest. He asked her name, voice cracked and rough. She didn't answer. Instead, she asked how he was hurt. He stared at the ceiling for a moment, before explaining that his group had been tracking cattle thieves not far from the river. The thieves were armed, organized, and spoke of claiming land for their own kind. He didn't say who they were, but she knew. Men like that didn't ride under flags. They rode under greed. She pressed him gently, asking if they had killed a rancher recently. Her voice shook, asking the question. He looked confused for a moment, then sorrow touched his face. He shook his head slowly and said his group had not attacked any rancher in weeks, that they had been avoiding conflict entirely. He swore on his ancestors. They had no reason to harm a man tending his land. His tone held truth, but her heart refused to believe it fully. Grief doesn't let go so easily. It clings to anger like a hawk clings to bone. The baby kicked again. It felt like a reminder that she was responsible for more than just herself now. As daylight crept through the window, she worked silently, grinding herbs and making broth. He watched her with quiet patience, though pain etched itself across his face. She brought him water and helped him drink. When he tried to lift the cup on his own, his arm trembled and she steadied it without thinking. Their hands brushed. She pulled away quickly, startled by the jolt that ran through her chest. She wasn't ready to feel anything except anger. To break the silence, he asked about her husband. She didn't answer at first. She stared into the fire, remembering how life had felt safe once. Then she told him, voice low, that her husband died protecting their land, that she believed warriors like him were responsible, that she was only helping him because she refused to let the child inside her be born into a world shaped only by bitterness. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he didn't defend his people. He didn't argue or explain. He simply said he understood loss. He said the land takes as much as it gives, and sometimes more. His honesty caught her off guard as afternoon stretched across the plains. She noticed something strange. A piece of leather tied around his wrist held a symbol burned into it. She had seen that same mark on a fragment of cloth her husband brought home months before he died. He claimed he found it near the river after hearing distant shouts in the canyon. She always wondered what it meant. Now she stared at it, feeling questions rise like a storm. He noticed her stare and covered it with his hand, his expression tightening with worry. She asked what the symbol stood for. He didn't answer. He looked away, jaw tense, like the truth could start another war. The wind outside picked up. Dust slapped against the windows. The world felt smaller, the walls holding more secrets than she expected. She wondered if she had just invited danger into her home, not a wounded man. Then, just as dusk settled, the sound of distant horses returned. Not the same group. A different rhythm. Sharper. Faster. She stood, heart pounding, and looked out the window. Figures rode toward the ranch, rifles glinting in the fading light. They carried no tribal colors. No friendly intentions. Men who moved with purpose. The wounded man sat up, pain forgotten, eyes dark with recognition. He said they were hunting him, that if they reached the house, they would not stop at one death. She backed away from the window, torn between fear and something that felt like destiny. She didn't know if she should hide him or push him outside and let fate decide. Either way, the riders were coming and she had little time to choose. The frontier held its breath as night settled, leaving her alone with a decision that might shape the rest of her life. And the life growing inside her, the horses came fast. Kicking up a trail of dust that glowed red in the last scrape of daylight, she counted 4 riders, maybe 5, dark shapes gliding along the fence line like they owned the land. Her hand went to her belly on its own, holding the child close as if she could shield it by touch alone. Inside, the wounded warrior swung his legs over the side of the cot, sweat beading on his forehead. Pain dragged at his face, but his eyes were sharp. "You cannot let them see me," said, voice low and strained. "And if I do," she shot back, "what then? Maybe they leave me alone. Maybe they're looking for you. Not for this ranch." He shook his head. "Men like that do not leave anything alone. They take from everyone." His words hit a raw place in her chest. She moved to the door, watching the riders draw closer. Their hats were pulled low, long coats flapped behind them. She saw rifles on their saddles, glints of metal at their hips, or in faces that had forgotten softer things like laughter and shame. Her mind raced. If those men were the ones who killed her husband, then the person lying injured in her house might hold the only clue to the truth. Yet helping him could drag a storm right to her doorstep. She was already in the middle of it. The wind whistled through the cracks in the walls like a warning. The warrior struggled to his feet, gripping the edge of the cot. He swayed, then steadied himself. His hand went to the band on his wrist, the symbol she recognized from her husband's cloth. She stared at it again, a knot tightening in her stomach. "Why do they want you?" she asked, not taking her eyes off the riders. "Tell me now." "They want what I know," he said. "About the men who pay them. About the lands they plan to take. They think if they kill me, the trail goes cold. Are they the ones who killed my husband?" He paused, and that hesitation burned more than any answer. "I do not know," he said finally. "But I know they kill for coin, and I know they have ridden this way before." Her hatred stirred, that dark, hungry voice inside whispering that she should hand him over. Let them drag his body away. Let them bleed each other dry. But another voice, quieter yet stubborn, reminded her that she had already chosen to save him once. Turning back now would stain whatever part of her still believed in mercy. The riders reached the yard. Hooves thudded against hard-packed earth. She closed the door halfway, keeping her hand on the latch. The warrior stepped back into the shadows, grabbing a blanket and wrapping it around his shoulders to hide the worst of his wounds. He moved behind a rough wooden screen near the fireplace. Breathing shallow, a heavy knock sounded at the door. She swallowed, wiped her palms on her skirt, and opened it just enough to see the man in front. He was taller than her, broad in the shoulders, with a face weathered by sun and dirt. His beard was trimmed, his coat worn but well kept, and his eyes carried the flat look of someone who had watched too many people die to care much anymore. "Evenin'." "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat in a lazy gesture that did nothing to soften the threat in his voice. "Hope we're not callin' too late. We're lookin' for a man. Rode through here not long ago. One of those plains riders. You happen to see anyone like that today?" Her heart pounded so loud she was sure he could hear it. She forced her face to stay calm. like this was just another visit from a stranger passing through. "Just me out here," she said. "And the cattle? Haven't seen anyone?" He glanced past her shoulder, eyes sliding over the dim interior. The fire cast a warm glow that showed very little, but she felt exposed all the same. "You alone?" he asked. "On a place this size?" "My husband died," she answered, letting the words sit between them. "I manage what I can." His gaze dropped to her swollen belly. Something close to amusement touched his lips. "Looks like you got more than enough to manage. Shame about your man? Rough country for a widow." She hated the way he said widow, like it was a weakness stamped on her forehead. "Who is it you're hunting?" she asked, trying to sound only mildly curious. "Just a troublemaker," he replied. "One of those fellas who thinks this frontier belongs to his people alone. We're bringing some order out here. Men pay us good money to keep the trails safe, keep the ranchers from losing stock, keep the settlers from getting arrows in their backs. You understand?" His words twisted inside her. He made himself sound like a protector, like the kind of man her husband used to respect, but something in his tone felt wrong, too smooth, like a snake sliding through dry grass. "If you see anyone," he added, "you let us know. He's dangerous. You don't want him anywhere near you or that child." Behind her, the warrior shifted faintly, a small sound in the quiet house. The man's gaze flicked over her shoulder again, and her stomach turned to ice. She stepped forward, blocking his view. "You're scaring my animals," she said, voice firmer. "If there's nothing else, I need to get back to work before dark." For a moment, she thought he might push his way inside. Instead, he leaned a hand on the doorframe and studied her face as if testing how far he could press. "We'll be camped near the creek tonight," he said at last. "If you change your mind about anything, you ride down and see us. Some truths are worth more than silence, especially out here." He flashed a thin smile that never reached his eyes, then turned to his men. They wheeled their horses around and rode off, circling the ranch once before heading toward the creek. She watched them until they were only specks against the falling night. When she closed the door, her legs shook. She braced herself on the table, pressing her hand harder against her belly to calm the tremor. "You lied for me?" the warrior said quietly from the shadows. "Don't make more of it than it is," she replied. "I lied because I don't trust any of you. Not them, not you. And I'm not giving anyone power over my home unless I have to." He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than she wished he did. "Those men carry the mark of the same ones who paid for the ambush at the river. They will not stop. If they think I am here, they will return. If they suspect you helped me, they will hurt you to get what they want." Her jaw tightened. Fear was one thing, but fear mixed with uncertainty cut deeper. "Then you need to start talking," she said. "What is that mark on your wrist? Why did my husband bring home a scrap with the same sign burned into it? What does it mean?" He looked down at the leather band, fingers tracing the symbol. For a moment, she thought he might refuse again. Finally, he spoke. "That mark does not belong to my people," he said. "It belongs to a group that trades in land and blood. They make agreements with ranchers, with towns, even with soldiers, promising protection. But they stir up trouble themselves so they can sell the cure. They send men like those riders to raid, to burn, to kill. Then they offer to chase the danger away. They wear this mark to show who they serve." "Why would you wear it then?" "I took it from a man who attacked us," he said. "One of the first we caught. I kept it so my people would know who we were truly up against. When we saw the mark on wagons and fences along the trails, we understood that some of the violence blamed on us was never ours." Her thoughts flew back to the night word came of her husband's death. Neighbors had talked about arrows, burned fences, hoofprints. No one questioned what they wanted to believe. It was easy to blame the tribe in the hills. It was harder to imagine men with the right color of skin riding under a false flag. She paced the room, the old wooden boards creaking softly. "If what you're saying is true," she murmured, "then those men know more about my husband's death than you ever could. Yet they stand at my door telling me they're here to make the frontier safe." "Safe for who?" he asked. That question settled over the room like smoke. Outside, the land darkened. Across the fields, faint campfire glow marked where the riders had settled near the creek. She knew they would drink, laugh, and plan. Maybe they would come back in the morning with more questions. Maybe they already suspected she had lied. The warriors' riders were still out there too, hidden beyond the hills, watching, waiting for a sign from their wounded leader. Two groups of men circling the same piece of land, and she was right in the center. A pregnant widow with nothing but a few rifles, a half-broken fence, and a stubborn will, as the hours stretched. A smaller conflict grew inside her. She had lost her husband. She had worked every day since to hold on to what he left behind. Now she faced a choice that could tear apart everything he fought to protect. If she sided with the warrior and his people, she risked being called a traitor by her neighbors, assuming any even came when she needed them. If she handed him over, she might gain favor with dangerous men and still never learn what truly happened the day her husband died. Later that night, when the winds settled and only the crackle of the fire remained, she sat across from the warrior and studied his face. The pain had not left, but there was strength in his eyes, quiet patience born from years of surviving harsh seasons. "You said my husband's death might not be what it seems," she said. "If I help you, if I hide you, if I risk this home for you, will you help me find the truth? Not tales, not guesses. The truth." He met her gaze and nodded once. "If I live long enough to stand again, I will take you to the place where all this started. You will see with your own eyes what kind of men wear that mark. Then you can decide who your enemy truly is." His promise both comforted and frightened her. The path he offered was not a gentle one. It did not lead back to the simple life she once knew on this old American ranch. It led deeper into the wild heart of the frontier, into secrets others had killed to keep. She rose to check the window again. The campfire near the creek still glowed, a small, steady light in the darkness. Somewhere beyond those hills, his people waited. And above everything, the sky stretched wide and indifferent. Stars scattered like tiny, distant witnesses. She rested a hand on her belly and felt the baby shift. As if unsettled by all the tension that wrapped around the house, she whispered a soft promise to the child that she would do everything she could to keep them safe, even if it meant walking into danger on purpose. In the distance, a coyote cried. The sound sent a shiver along her spine. The night on the frontier had always been full of unknowns. But now, every whisper of wind felt like a warning. She knew dawn would bring questions. The riders at the creek would not simply ride away. They would search. They would test her again. And the wounded man in her house, the man she should have let die according to her anger, was the one thing standing between a buried lie and a painful truth. The fire burned low, shadows climbing the walls like restless spirits. As she faced the long, sleepless hours before sunrise, caught between enemies she could see and secrets that were only beginning to rise from the dust, the air shifted before dawn, the kind of change that wakes a person even before their eyes open. She sat upright in her chair, not sure if it was instinct, fear, or the kicking inside her that pulled her back to awareness. The fire had burned low, glowing at the edges like embers refusing to die. The house was quiet except for the soft, strained breathing of the wounded man resting on the cot. His fever had risen during the night, sweat running down his temples, and she had done what she could to keep it from getting worse. But his body was still locked in a fight it might not win. Outside, faint shapes moved across the plains. The riders at the creek had woken too. She could see their silhouettes against the pale blue morning light, moving toward their horses with slow, calculated purpose. They weren't leaving. They were preparing for something. She reached for her coat, pulling it around herself as much to hide her fear as to fight the cold. She cracked open the door just enough to listen. The wind carried only fragments of their voices, but the rhythm of their movements said everything. They were coming back to question her. Maybe to search the house. Maybe worse. She shut the door and leaned her back against it, breathing slow, trying to quiet the pounding in her chest. The warrior pushed himself up again, sitting with effort. His voice sounded rough, but steadier than before. "They will come inside today," he said. She nodded. "I know. You do not have to protect me, he added. If you tell them I ran during the night, they might believe you. Your child matters more than a wounded stranger. The suggestion sparked anger in her chest, not at him, but at the fact that he thought she could just walk away from the choice she had already made. She had lied for him, cleaned his wounds, shared her fire. She had already crossed that line, and there was no turning back without losing something she couldn't name. You think I want any of this? She whispered. You think I don't wake up wishing you had never been dragged to my gate? But I can't undo it, and I won't hand you over like livestock. He held her gaze, not with pride but with quiet recognition, like he understood the weight she carried without needing to hear more. She turned away, pacing the room. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and she pressed her palm to her belly with a wince. The world didn't care that she was pregnant. It didn't slow down, didn't soften its blows. The frontier demanded strength even when a person had nothing left. She heard horses approaching, hooves grinding over the frozen dirt. The sound crawled up her spine. She took a breath and stepped outside, closing the door behind her. The rider stopped a few yards away. The man from the night before dismounted and approached, his coat swaying in the breeze. His expression held no polite mask this time. His patience was gone. "Mornin' again," he said, though it sounded more like a warning than a greeting. "You sleep all right? Get by," she replied. He narrowed his eyes. "We're here because tracks lead straight through your yard. Someone crossed your fence last night. Maybe even came through your home. That's a bit strange for a quiet ranch like this." She kept her face calm, even as her heart twisted painfully. "Animals cross my land all the time. Strays, travelers, hard to keep track." He stepped closer, voice dropping low. "We're done asking polite. We know he's here. We found blood on the trail, fresh. Now you tell us where he is, or we take a look inside ourselves." Her pulse thudded against her ribs. She felt exposed in front of him, alone and outnumbered. The farmhouse behind her felt fragile, just wood and nails barely holding back a storm. She took a step forward, blocking the door with her body. "You come into my home without cause. You'll regret it," she said, though her voice shook. "There's nothing here for you." One of the other riders laughed under his breath. The leader's jaw tightened. He raised his hand, and the riders spread out in a half circle, their horses stamping the ground. The tension rose thick and sharp, like a wire pulled so tight it could slice skin. "You're a brave woman," he said slowly. "But bravery gets people killed. Last chance. Step aside." Before she could answer, the door behind her creaked. She froze. The warrior stood in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket but standing tall despite the pain. He didn't hide, didn't reach for a weapon. He simply looked at the riders with a calm expression that unsettled them more than anger would have. "Enough," he said, voice rough but steady. "You want me. Here I stand. Leave her and her child out of this." Her breath caught, anger and fear twisting together. She didn't want him to surrender. Not like that. Not after everything. But his presence changed the air between them all. The riders shifted in their saddles, surprised he was still alive, surprised he could stand. The leader smirked. "You think this ends because you walked out the door? You're worth more alive than dead, but we ain't picky." He stepped forward, and she grabbed his arm before she realized what she was doing. "You're using him," she whispered. "You don't want justice. You want control." His expression flickered, annoyance breaking through. He pulled his arm away, eyes hard. "You don't know what you just involved yourself in." Her grip tightened on the edge of her coat as he shouted to his men. Two riders dismounted and marched toward them, one reaching for the warrior's shoulder. The warrior staggered but resisted, teeth clenched from pain. She stepped between them again, shouting at them to stop. But they pushed her aside like she was nothing more than a gust of wind. She stumbled, nearly falling, but caught herself on the doorframe. One rider drew a rope, ready to bind the warrior's hands. Another grabbed his arm, yanking him forward. The warrior stumbled again, blood seeping through the bandage she wrapped earlier. Something inside her snapped. The kind of snap that changes a person forever. She marched to the porch, grabbed her husband's rifle from the wall, and cocked it with one sharp motion. The sound echoed across the yard. "Let him go," she shouted, breath shaking. Voice stronger than she expected. The men froze. The leader slowly turned, eyes narrowing. "You gonna shoot us, widow?" Her hands trembled, but she didn't lower the weapon. "I'm going to protect this land. And if he's right, you're the real threat here, not him." The leader took a step toward her, hand drifting toward his holster. "Put that gun down before you do something stupid." The warrior saw her grip falter. He spoke softly, not to stop her, but to keep her steady. "Stand your ground. Do not let them decide for you." The tension rattled through her bones. She couldn't shoot. Not with a child inside her. But she couldn't surrender either. The world felt like it was closing in, the kind of moment where the future hinges on a single breath before anyone moved. Oh. A distant sound broke across the plains. Hooves. Many hooves. Coming fast, every rider turned toward the hills. Shadows appeared along the ridge, horses cresting the slope as the sun finally rose. The warriors' people, they rode in formation, not charging, but making their presence known with silent force. Painted horses, sharp eyes, armed with spears and bows. Enough to shift the balance, the hired riders backed away from the house, forming a defensive line. The leader cursed under his breath, calculating whether to fight or retreat. The warrior stepped forward, no longer hiding the pain in his voice. "This ends here. You will not harm her. You will not take what is not yours." The leader spat on the ground. "You think they scare me? There's more of us than you know. More guns. More money behind us than you could ever fight." He mounted his horse, retreating just enough to keep distance. "Enjoy your little victory. It won't last." The hired men rode off, disappearing across the plains, leaving dust clouds drifting behind them. The standoff broke, but the danger didn't fade. If anything, it grew sharper, because now both sides had shown their cards. The warriors' riders approached slowly, stopping a short distance from the ranch. Their leader dismounted and bowed slightly toward her, not in submission, but in respect. The warrior swayed, knees buckling. She dropped the rifle and rushed to support him before he fell. He leaned into her, exhausted, yet still watching the horizon where the riders had vanished. "This is not the end," he murmured. "They will return with more men. Their leader is only the beginning." She held his weight, her breath unsteady, eyes drifting toward the open plains stretching endlessly ahead. The ranch no longer felt like the safe corner of the world she once believed. It was now a crossroads, a battleground. A place where truths buried in dust were clawing their way back to the surface. The wind lifted, brushing her hair across her face. The baby shifted again, as if sensing the storm gathering around them. She looked at the warrior, his eyes heavy but determined, and felt something fierce rise inside her. Not love, not yet, but purpose. A need to know what happened. To face whatever truth lay waiting beyond the horizon, they stood together on the threshold of the house. Both wounded in different ways. Both bound to a journey neither planned. The frontier had stopped being wide and lonely. Now it was closing in, pushing them toward a path that would demand everything they had left. And when the sun finally climbed high, enough to clear the ridge, she knew the next step would change everything. The days that followed carried a quiet stillness, the kind that comes after storms, but before the land settles again. The riders who threatened her ranch no longer camped near the creek. Their presence faded from sight, but not from memory. She kept the rifle close, watching the horizon each morning, wondering when they might return. Yet, for the first time since the trouble began, she didn't feel alone. The warriors' people kept watch from a distance, shifting like shadows across the hills, protecting the ranch out of loyalty to him and respect for her choice to save his life. Inside the house, he recovered slowly. His strength returned in small ways at first, like when he stood longer without pain, or when he took short walks outside to breathe the cold morning air. She often found him near the corral, watching the cattle wander freely. He seemed to understand the ranch in a way her husband once did, seeing it not as land to own, but as land to care for. It softened something inside her, though she didn't admit it out loud. Not yet. One evening, as she boiled herbs on the stove, she asked the question that had been growing in her heart. "When you're strong enough to leave," she said, "where will you go?" He set down the wooden bowl he had carved during recovery, thinking before he answered. "I will return to my people," he said. "We need to warn others about the men who ride under that mark. They will strike again. Not just at us, but at ranches, towns, anyone who stands in their way." She nodded, feeling a tug she couldn't explain. "I want to know the truth about my husband," she whispered. "The real truth. I want to see where it happened and why." He looked at her, his expression gentle. "I will take you," he promised. "But not today. You are close to giving birth. We go when you are ready, not before." His concern surprised her, warming the distance she kept around her heart. She had spent so long building walls that kindness felt like something unfamiliar, almost dangerous. Yet each day he healed, those walls felt less needed. Weeks passed. Snow dusted the mountains, and the sky took on the pale light of winter. She learned small things about him. He had lost family too, not in one moment, but over many seasons of conflict. He carried memories in silence, not to hide them, but because speaking them changed nothing. He treated the ranch animals with the same respect she showed them. He never tried to replace what her husband was. Yet he filled the empty spaces with quiet help, fixing fences, chopping wood, repairing tools without being asked. She found herself watching him more often, not in fear or anger, but in curiosity. He caught her once, and she turned away quickly, feeling like a young girl again. The moment passed without words, but it stayed with her. One night, wind rattled the windows and snow swept across the plains. She woke to a sharp pain, deep and familiar, pulsing through her like a wave. She gripped the edge of the bed, breath short. The baby had decided it was time, she called out, voice strained. The warrior rushed to her side, steadying her as another contraction seized her body. Panic flickered in his eyes, not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility. He wrapped blankets around her shoulders and helped her to the main room, close to the fire. She gave him instructions between breaths, every word tight with pain. Her husband had always planned to be there when this moment came, but life had turned its own direction. Now the child would enter a world different from the one she imagined. He did everything she asked. He boiled water, brought clean cloths, and held her hand when the pain forced tears from her eyes. She didn't feel alone. For the first time since losing her husband, she felt supported, not by someone trying to replace what she lost, but by someone who understood what she carried. Hours passed. The storm outside faded, leaving the world silent and white. And then the cries filled the room, small yet fierce, a new life arriving in the glow of the fire. She held the baby against her chest, exhausted, overwhelmed. Tears falling without her noticing. The warrior knelt beside her, watching with a look that held awe and something softer than gratitude. She noticed him touch his chest, as if honoring the moment with silent respect. "She is strong," he said quietly. "Born in winter, under a sky that keeps secrets." She smiled tiredly. "She will grow up learning the truth, not lies spun by men who hide their deeds." He stayed through the night, keeping the fire alive and making sure she rested. The baby slept peacefully, wrapped in a blanket woven by her husband long before he died. Morning sunlight warmed the room, turning the newborn's face golden. A few days later, when she had regained strength, the warrior saddled 2 horses. She wrapped the baby close to her body and stepped outside, the cold air waking her fully. He helped her mount gently, then climbed onto his own horse. Their small group rode across the plains, moving toward the place where her husband's trail ended. They reached a narrow canyon carved through red rock. The ground still carried faint traces of old struggle: burned wood, broken leather, an arrowhead buried in dirt, but not the kind her husband claimed belonged to the tribe. It was shaped differently, filed by hands that worked for coin, not loyalty. She knelt near the ashes, touching the earth with trembling fingers. The warrior pointed to tracks still visible, explaining how riders had chased someone through the canyon. He showed where hoof prints changed direction, where someone fell, where a rifle had been fired. As he spoke, the truth unfolded in pieces. Her husband hadn't died defending his land from tribal warriors. He had stumbled into an ambush set by the men who later claimed to be protecting settlers. They blamed the tribe to spark fear, to sell their services, to claim more land. Her husband simply became a casualty of their greed. She closed her eyes, letting the grief shift inside her. It didn't fade, but it changed shape. The anger she carried for so long no longer had a place to rest. She felt sorrow, clean and sharp, but no longer poisoned by lies. He stood beside her, silent, letting her take the time she needed. She finally looked at him, tears running quietly. "You showed me the truth," she said. "Thank you. I showed you only what the land already knew," he replied. "You chose to see it." They rode back slowly, not as enemies or strangers, but as people who had crossed a hard road together. She felt lighter, though the world had not grown easier. There were still men out there ready to spill blood for land and money. But she wasn't helpless anymore. She had truth. She had allies. And she had a child whose future depended on more than fear. Time passed. The riders who once threatened her ranch tried to return, found warriors waiting at the ridge, not just a widow standing alone. Word spread across nearby settlements, not of conflict, but of a ranch where two worlds guarded the same land. She rebuilt her fences. He returned to his people, promising to stand with her when needed. And though he left, he didn't stay gone. He visited often, bringing gifts for the baby and news from the trails. Their bond grew slowly, built on trust instead of longing. When he finally took her hand months later, it felt like something earned, not stolen from the past. The ranch thrived again. The child grew strong, crawling across the wooden floor with bright eyes that carried pieces of both worlds around her. The plains no longer felt empty. The future no longer felt heavy. She stood at the well one warm evening, drawing water as the sun dipped behind the mountains. The warrior approached, stopping beside her. He reached for the bucket, offering a silent hand. This time, she let him help. She glanced at the fading sky, the wind brushing her hair, and felt peace settle over her like a gentle blanket. The world had taken much from her, but it had returned something she never expected, a new beginning born from mercy instead of hate. She smiled softly, the baby laughing in her arms, and the land stretched wide around them, welcoming the quiet promise of the life still ahead.